Oliver Larkin is here. He's running for Congress in Florida against a Democrat, a corporate Democrat, an AIPAC funded sycophant named Jared Moxowitz. I can't say his last name. Jared Moxowitz. I'm not trying to be rude. I can't pronounce his last name for some reason. I apologize. And this guy Moxowitz is basically a MAGA Republican when it comes to foreign policy. And he has continued to fund Netanyahu as he's continued to commit genocide. He refuses to restrict any aid or military arms to Israel, even as they violate the Leahy laws. And even now, I was one of two Democrats to vote against the Iran war powers resolution. He is pro-bombing Iran. Never mind the fact that 60% of Americans don't have enough to pay rent or buy food. Never mind the fact that it's an illegal war with no justification whatsoever. Never mind the fact that it has killed thousands of Iranian civilians, including at least 175 Iranian schoolgirls. None of that matters to him. What matters to him is just being a bloody war hawk and killing innocent people. And this guy running against him, I'm super impressed by Oliver Larkin. We'll talk about him or talk to him in just a minute, but briefly, he's done the work for the last decade as an organizer, a staunch progressive, running a people-funded campaign, and just doing things the right way. So we're going to go to break, and so we really want to get him on very quickly and talk to him at length about his campaign and the work he's doing. And I will just say this. You know, last week we had, or a week or two ago, we had the primary elections in Illinois. And we saw the absurd amount of money spent by AIPAC and by MAGA billionaires and by AI and crypto and DraftKings. None of these organizations have any interest in the well-being of working people. But they've got a crap ton of money and they're spending tens of millions. They spent nearly $70 million to try to buy the Illinois elections. And in some cases, they were successful, unfortunately. But we have 45 more states to go that have not had their primary elections yet. Florida is one of them. We need to activate and organize. And one thing I'll ask every person here to do is set up a tool called Sway, sway.co. It's a free app. It allows you to organize locally. And I want to re-emphasize, it is free. You need to go and check it out. Google my name once you get in there, or search my name once you get in there. Join my voting group. I'll be putting out voting lists for every state on who are the right people-funded candidates that we need to be supporting. But it's a free way to get organized effectively and increase voter. Welcome to Let's Address This with Qasim Rashid. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so we can continue to protect your human rights and our democracy. I'm excited about our guest today, Oliver Larkin, born on the most patriotic of days, on the 4th of July, running for U.S. Congress in Florida. Oliver, thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
We were talking offline, and when your team reached out to have this conversation, I feel like you guys have been running some kind of a whisper campaign, because I've had a ton of people reach out independent of you and say, hey, you've really got to talk to this guy. He's the real deal. Why are people so excited about your race?
I think we're really challenging the assumptions in South Florida of the kind of progressive campaign that is viable in a district where Republicans are targeting it. And my thesis of this campaign is really that it's not that Florida doesn't need to have progressive candidates elected. It's in fact that we've been running these centrist neoliberal candidates for so long, and that's actually been what's depressed the Democratic voter base. And so to have us actually motivate people to turn out to vote, young people, working class people, we need someone who actually stands on our Democratic Party values, on our progressive values, rather than continuously tacking to the center. So I think what's really broken through recently with this Iran war powers resolution, with Trump's illegal war on Iran, expanding our support for Israel, what Israel is doing in Lebanon. It's really put a focus on Jared Moskowitz, on his initial opposition to Ro Khanna and Thomas Massey's war powers resolution as one of the first Democrats to give Trump a blank check to take us into war. And for myself, running as a staunch anti-war, anti-genocide candidate who's unapologetically saying we need to stop U.S. military funding for Israel and their genocide and their apartheid and their human rights abuses, I think that cuts against the assumptions of what a credible campaign can look like in South Florida. But what we're finding is that's actually what's building our momentum.
I love that. And just to kind of put a fine point on it, your opponent, Jared Moxowitz, is the first Democrat to join the Doge caucus. He's been appointed by DeSanctimonious, to quote Trump twice, by Ron DeSantis twice to different committees. And he voted, he's the only Democrat in Florida to vote for the Lake and Riley Act, which, for those of you who are unaware of this piece of legislation, it's a grotesque piece of legislation that denies due process for immigrants and undocumented immigrants. The pure fascism, and Jared voted for it as a Democrat, which is extraordinarily troubling. And now with this illegal war on Iran, he's giving Trump a blank check as a Democrat. So, like, notwithstanding his support of genocide in Palestine, he's doubling down on that now and saying, yeah, we should also wage war in Iran. It's killed, I think, 2,000 civilians last I've seen. It's just untenable that this is a person representing us. What? Why have MAGAs when you have corporate Democrats like this? But so let's step back for a second, Oliver, because everybody has kind of this superhero origin story where they're like, I'm sick of this crap. This does not just function for me anymore. I'm going to run for Congress. What was that moment for you?
Yeah, I think it really started last year when Congressman Moskowitz did not have any primary opposition in 2024. And when he was elected first in 2022, these last two election cycles have been two of the absolute worst in the history of the Florida Democratic Party. People forget that 2018, 2020, Florida was a very close state. It was very thin margins, but the bottom just completely fell out. And it's coincided with the election of this DeSantis appointed, Elon Musk supporting Trumpy Democrat. And I was not willing to let another election cycle go by with our congressman being unopposed in the primary, particularly when after the 2024 election and his staunch support for Israel, denial of the genocide, he literally authored the House resolution barring the State Department from citing data from the Gaza Health Ministry, which the IDF itself just accepted. He was one of 22 Democrats who voted to censure Rashida Tlaib. He's done a bunch of other stuff as well, but considering all of that, and then after 2024, he turned around and blamed progressives for why we lost the election to Donald Trump and Republicans, at the same time that he was turning around and becoming the very first Democrat in the entire Congress to join Elon Musk's Doge caucus. I just found that to be incredibly duplicitous. And for myself, as a 10-year campaign staffer, I started out organizing on Bernie Sanders' 2016 presidential campaign. I literally quit my job as a line cook and drove to New Hampshire to start volunteering and just didn't go away until they got me on paid staff. Traveled the country with that campaign. I helped organize a union in my workplace with the CWA News Guild. And I just had to look at myself and say, am I capable of doing this? Am I capable of running a credible, viable, progressive campaign to actually assert a different kind of vision and give South Floridians a choice? And when I arrived at the conclusion that I could, in fact, do that, that I've built these connections and these relationships over 10 years in the progressive movement, and I've been perfectly content to be a background player, to be a supporting player, to support candidates being elected, progressives being elected. I just had to ask myself, am I ready to step out from behind the camera to in front of it and really assert the kind of vision for the kind of candidacy that I felt like South Floridians have deserved for so long. And I just wasn't willing to wait around for someone else to do it. I had to do it. And
I
this was
love
the
that.
cycle to do it.
We need fighters, right? We need people who are not going to wait for permission or ask for permission, but will just go and just, break things and get things done. That's really what it comes down to. And for those who will inevitably say, well, you've never held elected office before, I have two responses to that. I'd love to hear your thoughts too. My two responses to that question are always the people who've held elected office have gotten us into this mess. So that's not really a flex. Like, we are on the cusp of fascism because the so-called, experienced candidates, experienced politicians didn't have the spine to do what's right. And two, you've done, in my view, the most important thing, and you spent a decade organizing communities. Every great leader in our country's history, whether it was Malcolm X or Dr. King or Rosa Parks or Clyde Colvin or Robert Smalls, they were all organizers. John Brown was an organizer at the core of it. That's how we broke through these unjust systems. But what is your response when you're on the campaign trail? You hear, I'm sure you hear this, that, well, you've never held, congressional office before. Why should we trust you right now?
Yeah, I think you make an apt comparison. We need more organizers in office. I think the problem, especially one with the progressive movement, because we rely on this grassroots power. Republicans have the corporate power, the special interests, the corporate PACs. So they don't really need the same level of organization to mobilize people, but we do. And so it is incredibly demobilizing to have corporate Democrats in office who say one thing on the campaign trail, but then they don't bring that level of organization with them into office to apply pressure and use the bully pulpit of elected office to fight for working class people. So I think being an organizer is an asset to me and to our district in this campaign, to have someone who's going to continue to stay in touch with the base of our party, who's going to be open and accessible. We're knocking doors every single weekend. I was just out on Sunday. We hit the most doors in a single day of the entire campaign, nearly 700 doors knocked. So we're mobilized. We have dozens of people out with us every single weekend, and we're bringing young people along. I think that is another asset. And when you talk about experience, who is that experience served. And it hasn't served the working class millennial or Gen Z residents of our district or working class residents of any generation in our district. So we need people who bring the vision of what it means to truly serve working class people. I think Democrats in office get so caught up in the means tested machinery of what bills can pass, what bills shouldn't pass. I remember what motivated me to go to New Hampshire 10 years ago was Bernie's call for a $15 minimum wage. And that was a very clear, easy to understand, more money in your paycheck for tens of millions of Americans. But once Kirsten Sinema gave that thumbs down and it failed in the Senate a few years ago, you didn't hear Democrats say boo about what the minimum wage should be for years. And it did not come up on the 2024 campaign trail during a cost of living election, during an election where we're talking about affordability, and Democrats aren't talking about raising the minimum wage when we've gone the longest period in US history without raising the minimum wage. So
Right.
for me, running on $25 an hour, these very clear, easy to understand, not means tested, but bold, universal economic policies. That's the experience that an organizer brings into office because we're in touch with the people, with the working class of our district. And I think that is the asset that we need to bring to bear in Congress to bring that pressure against the corporate establishments of both the Democratic and Republican parties to really compel some real progressive change.
Yeah, beautifully said. I mean, I think the economic populist message needs to be the mainstream message at this point. We are living in the worst wealth and income inequality in the modern history of this country, certainly worse than after the Great Depression, even. And we're walking around as if it's normal. And the corporate media headlines are so offensive. There was one from CBS that said 60% of Americans can't make ends meet. What the hell is bottom 60? Majority of Americans, like just say it. Basically two-thirds of Americans aren't able to make enough to pay their basic living expenses. And I think one of the reasons why Democrats lost the 2024 election is because they refuse to fight for these basic necessities. I'll add to your point about minimum wage. The child tax credit, once it expired, childhood poverty increased 33%. Do you think those parents watching their children go hungry thought, he's trying, Biden is trying, so this should be enough? No, you need to try harder. You need to deliver. And I give the example of Zoran Mamdani. When he got elected, he had a plus 38 approval rating. Right now, after 3 months in office, they're like, well, the honeymoon's over. Now he's got a plus 48 approval rating because he's investing in communities. What do you see as your political, I don't want to say heroes, 'cause I feel like that's too dramatic, but who do you model your political philosophy after by electing you? Who are folks investing in terms of who has shaped your thought processes and your ability to govern and lead in the future?
Yeah, I think one to begin with is Senator Bernie Sanders, the one who motivated me 10 years ago to go to New Hampshire and fight for a working class progressive message and really challenging our assumptions about what politics in this country could look like or sound like. Another one that I would say, and one that is maybe a more proximate example for what I'm trying to do, is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, running as a first-time candidate for federal office, had never run for any lower legislative or municipal office beforehand, but challenged an entrenched member of the Democratic Party, and now is one of the most popular politicians in the United States because people see very clearly that she is fighting for working class interests and that she's not funded by these corporate PACs or special interests. So I would say those are two very proximate examples. But I think it is working class candidates all across the country. And not all of them, by the way, have won elected office. I was so inspired by Nita Alam in North Carolina's
Mhm.
4th District. She was, like myself, an organizer on Bernie Sanders' 2016 presidential campaign. Seeing people of my generation step forward and take on those challenges and be able to take the negative attacks that AIPAC and crypto and AI sling at us and still come out standing tall, I think really is inspiring to me, and it's motivating to me because my fight is Nita's fight, it's AOC's fight, it's Bernie's fight, and this is what we need to bring to bear. And so I would say, with those examples in elected office, but it's not just those who've won, it's people running all across the country, regardless of quote unquote viability or whether they're in a red or purplish or blue district. It is just people bringing the message of justice and economic, racial, environmental justice to our politics. I think that is what's changing the country and what is hopefully changing the Democratic Party and moving it in a more progressive direction.
Yeah, and I would even say, I mean, co-sign everything you said. I would even say what we label as progressive is often actually very moderate. Like, I mean, not dying because you can't pay your cancer bill is not a progressive thing to me. It's a very common sense, moderate thing to me. Having clean water to drink that isn't polluted because the EPA has been gutted, to me is not like a progressive left wing, bleeding heart liberal thing. It's pretty common sense. Ensuring that children aren't hungry in school, to me, shouldn't be a left wing progressive thing. It's a pretty common thing. And so often I get frustrated with the corporate media narrative that these are these left wing, and then they'll juxtapose it as opposition to like the MAGA right wing fascists. Like, no, there's no equivocation here. One is actual fascism. The other one is saying, hey, maybe we should treat human beings like they're human beings. So let's say you win this primary, address the concern that some might have that, well, the only reason Moskowitz is there is because he runs to the right. He's so center right. It's a purple district. We might risk losing the district if we nominate you in the primary. How do you address that concern?
Yeah, I would say one, we need someone who's going to motivate the Democratic base to turn out, and people who are suffering because they have medical debt, who are suffering because of the Medicaid cuts, the austerity of Republicans' one big beautiful bill in a state that never expanded Medicaid in the first place under the ACA, one of 10 states. We need someone who's going to fight for, as you said, these are middle of the road positions. We are talking about addressing the crises in this country by making sure that people have the right to universal health care, that their kids are able to be happy, healthy, and fed in school, that our teachers are compensated fairly without needing to live out of their cars or buy their own school supplies. And my message to Republicans in our district is for many of us, Medicare for all, it is enough to say that healthcare should be a human right for every single person in this country. But I also think there's a very compelling economic argument for Medicare for all from the perspective of small business owners and people who have a more economic mind to say, what is the number one cost for your small business after labor? And it is going to be healthcare. It is healthcare time and time again that prevents business owners from growing, from expanding their benefits. It's the number one thing that unions have to bargain over and have to make concessions in other areas because healthcare is so important and fundamental to their members. I think bringing our message to a general election and showing really the viability of the quote unquote progressive message, which, as we know, is just the majority position of most Americans, that the
Mhm.
minimum wage should be higher, that there should be Medicare for all, that we should not have political corruption enabled by decisions like Citizens United. I think this is actually going to be very motivating for people who might not consider themselves to be a rank Democratic partisan or Republican partisan, but just want to see our politics actually speak to the lived realities of people without getting caught up in this high minded language. It's just, at the end of the day, about an economy that we can afford. If you want to talk about a majoritarian position in Florida, Florida Atlantic University in our district in Boca Raton polled last fall and found that more than half of Floridians are considering leaving our state because of the cost of living crisis. If you're a Republican, if you're a Democrat, if you're an independent, your rent, your utility bill does not care what partisan affiliation you have. And I think running a Democratic candidate who's unencumbered by the corporate donations from the health insurance and big pharma industry. Jared Moskowitz has taken tens of thousands of dollars from Big Sugar, from Florida Power and Light, and other private investor-owned utilities like Duke Energy. Florida Power and Light just raised Florida's utility rates by $7 billion. And we don't have a Democrat who's able to say anything about that because he relies on their corporate PAC for his donations. And so I think there's a tremendous amount of freedom and liberty and dexterity in being able to run without these corporate or special interests that are muzzling really our Democratic representative when we need to be fighting and advocating for working class people, regardless of their political beliefs or their partisan affiliation. I think that's how we build a better, stronger, more all encompassing Democratic Party. And I think ultimately that's a winning message for South Florida and for candidates running on this message all across the country.
Speaking of Oliver Larkin running for Congress in Florida for the Democratic primary, his opponent is corporate pro genocide establishment shill Jared Moskowitz. But we got a couple hundred people watching. Somebody in the comments said, and I have an answer for this, but I think you'll have a better answer. I wish you would stop saying Medicare for all. Medicare is expensive, and even with it, healthcare is frequently out of reach. Medicaid is what we want. Do you want to address that concern?
Yeah, I actually have a great story about this from our canvas on Sunday. I spoke to a young, pregnant, 24-year-old woman, and I asked her what her number one concern was. We're going door to door in the community, just asking Democratic voters what's on their mind. And Medicaid access was number one. I think Medicaid is such a lifesaver. And while certainly I want to go into Congress and fight for Medicare for all. And that is the ideal. It's going to be a long road to get there. While I'm not going to compromise on taking donations from big pharma or private health insurance, I am absolutely going to fight to expand Medicaid in states like Florida and all across the country. The Medicaid defunding is leading to the closure of rural hospitals. It's leading to community health centers that cannot afford to continue to run their operations. And it's making healthcare providers unable to really reliably earn a living by serving the communities where they live. And so Medicaid and the benefits that that provides is something that I'm absolutely going to fight for. Restoring that funding, I think we can do that in the next budget reconciliation. Hopefully Democrats take back the House of Representatives in November. Would love to see us take back the Senate as well. But once we take back some of these chambers of Congress and we can play some hardball with Donald Trump and force him to veto additional healthcare funding to restore funding for Medicaid, I think that's going to set up the battle for the 2028 presidential election. And I do think that with the power of having a majority in Congress, we can restore some of the funding for Medicaid through reconciliation and restore some of the service, the core service that people rely on for their healthcare.
I'm getting a lot of questions about AIPAC, and I'm going to ask you that in a minute. But you mentioned that you're confident and hopeful that we retake the House this November. I am too, assuming we have elections, assuming Trump doesn't try to shut down midterms with these ICE fascists. But let's say we do take the House back and you do win this primary, and you win this general, we'll will it into existence. The vote comes up for Speaker of the House. Are you voting for Hakeem Jeffries?
I've been clear on this. I am not supporting Hakeem Jeffries for House Speaker. I spoke to Axios about this back in October. I was really dismayed at that point by Leader Jeffries' inability to stand behind Zohran Mamdani for New York City mayor, running to represent the city that Hakeem Jeffries represents in New York City. When you hear this vote blue, no matter who, it only seems to move in one direction, and it's further and further to the right when we have a bold candidate like Zohran Mamdani with a new vision, a positive vision for what being a Democrat and being a public servant really should be. There was incredible just inertia against Hakeem Jeffries or Chuck Schumer moving to support them, Kirsten Gillibrand as well, many elected Democrats in New York. And so I think with a small but committed progressive membership within the Democratic Party, with myself and hopefully some other members, we should be able to exert some real demands over Democratic Party leadership in order to elect a House Speaker. I'm obviously not going to throw the House speakership to a Republican, but I do not believe that Hakeem Jeffries has met the moment, and I would like to see a competitive election for Democratic House leader, for Speaker of the House in January.
Yep.
And I would very much hope to support a more progressive alternative that's really going to fight to unify all segments of our party and not back down when we are electing more progressive candidates that are asserting a new vision for where the Democratic Party should move. I think
Yep.
that's the kind of leadership we
Well
need.
said. That's the right answer. And I don't know if you can see the comments, but there's been dozens of comments. Everyone is agreeing with you 100% that we need new leadership. And, even just now, Hakeem Jeffries is rightly condemning Trump for spending money illegally bombing Iran. This is the same guy who happily sent $38 billion to Netanyahu to illegally bomb Gaza. And I don't know if he thinks we can't see the hypocrisy or if he doesn't care that we see the hypocrisy. Either way, to me, it's extraordinarily disqualifying. And so, speaking of foreign policy, one of the questions we're just getting a barrage of is, hey, I like your ideas. How are you going to withstand the attacks from AIPAC? Because we know that Moskowitz is heavily funded by AIPAC. We saw how AIPAC just spent $22 million in Illinois to go after progressive candidates, anyone who is even slightly critical of Israel and the genocide is committing on Gaza. What is the game plan to overcome that onslaught?
Yeah, I think it starts with our field program. And as I mentioned, we've been knocking on doors, had our highest single day of canvassing contacts on Sunday. We have a goal of knocking on 80,000 doors in this primary by our August 18th election. So it's going to start with breaking through the noise of the media and the negative attacks by having face-to-face conversations. So we have hundreds of volunteers that are participating with the campaign already. We're training them to become field leads. We are going to need fundraising support. We don't need to be at parity one-to-one, but we do need the resources to at least counteract the negative attacks that are going to be sent our way. But this is really about building presence across media, speaking with independent content creators such as yourself, really having a no holds barred strategy to be everywhere. I'm showing up also at every single event that we're having locally in the district. I have not seen our congressman yet, but we're going to LGBTQ events. I was at the Florida AIDS Walk on Saturday. I've been to, during the month of Ramadan, many different iftars at different masjids across our district, and even a little bit outside of our district, because people, of course, travel to their local masjid and doesn't always follow the district lines. So we're building relationships in faith communities with immigrant communities, standing up against. We've got the headquarters of the GEO Group, the private prison corporation, right here in our district in Boca Raton. So we're really a flashpoint for many of these national fights that we're seeing waged in primary battles all across the country. And so it's going to have to come down to organizing. It's going to have to come down to our media presence, building relationships, and also reaching younger people that don't always necessarily turn out. Florida Atlantic University, as I mentioned, 31,000 undergraduate students, one of the first universities in the country to be entered into a 287G agreement, deputizing Florida Atlantic University campus police to work with ICE. Jared Moskowitz actually wrote the letter of recommendation for a GEO Group executive vice president, a private prison executive, Adam Hasner, to become president of FAU with no previous experience in higher education administration. So we see Jared Moskowitz, our Democratic incumbent, literally working with private prison executives to exert control over our public universities. So these are the kinds of fights that we're going to be pushing and highlighting, because there's a very clear choice in this Democratic primary. There couldn't be a much clearer choice between these two candidates. And so it's going to come down to field and media, and yes, fundraising. We have to take a clear stand and be able to build that presence to counteract what AIPAC and corporate PACs and AI and cryptocurrency and all of them are doing.
Yeah, because they're going to come in hard. And is this to kind of double down on this point that you made, Oliver? And I put your link in the chat for folks to donate. It's not enough for us to simply condemn AIPAC and complain about Citizens United. We need to show up, not just at the ballot box on election day, on now to volunteer, to donate, $5, $10, $100, whatever is in your capacity. Because it's one thing to say, well, you should be a people funded candidate. Well, we're the people that we got to fund the candidate and we have to support. So for those watching, this is a candidate that you want to support because this is the kind of leadership that we need. And this other point you made about 287G agreements, I want you to talk a bit more about this because I don't think enough people understand how these exist, how actually easy they are to break if you have local willpower, and how the Trump regime has been using these to expand the impact of ICE in our local communities. Can you talk a bit more about what 287G agreements are for those who are unfamiliar with this?
Yeah, so the 287G agreement is what enables local municipal police departments, law enforcement agencies to be deputized to carry out ICE's detention and deportation efforts. And so in Florida, we don't necessarily have the same highly visible ICE presence that we've seen in other parts of the country, like in Minneapolis or Chicago or Los Angeles, because we have a very compliant Republican administration in Tallahassee with Ron DeSantis. And so rather than having ICE agents helicopter into blue areas of the state, as we've seen in other parts of the country, we just have local municipal police departments, the Florida Highway Patrol, sheriff's offices, campus police at FAU, at Florida International University in Miami, actually entering into these 287 agreements to do ICE's work for them. And so you don't necessarily get the spectacle of ICE showing up and descending down on a community, but yet the same things are happening. Of course, we have, as it's called, Alligator Alcatraz, the detention center in the Florida Everglades on Miccosukee land. We've got the Broward Transitional Center, which is a private GEO Group operated ICE detention center right here in our district in Pompano Beach, where a Haitian national, Marie Ange Blaise, died in April of last year, one of the many, many deaths to occur in ICE custody. We've got ICE facilities all across our state, GEO Group facilities all across our state. In Moorhaven, in the Glades Correctional Facility, a 19-year-old detainee just died by suicide because of the absolutely depraved conditions. And so just because you don't see ICE coming in does not mean that these detention and deportation efforts aren't happening. They're just happening under the cover of local law enforcement. And so what we need to do is break these 287G agreements. It was something that Ron DeSantis did when Trump won office, is to compel Florida law enforcement to work with ICE. And that's why we have people like FAU President Adam Hasner entering into the 287G agreement. And ultimately, it leads to racial profiling. It leads to unnecessary detentions and police stops. And as we've seen in the fiscal year, in the new fiscal year, upwards of 3/4 of people detained by ICE or by these law enforcement agencies that are doing their bidding through 287G, upwards of 3/4 of people have no criminal background whatsoever. They're just being racially profiled or profiled for speaking Spanish in public. I like to remind people the First Amendment also covers your ability to speak Spanish or Creole or Portuguese, as so many people do in South Florida. The First Amendment does not stop and end at the English language, but we have a regime that is profiling people based on race, based on ethnicity, and 287G agreements allow it to happen under the cover of purported local law enforcement, even if they're doing the very same things that ICE is doing.
Somebody's asking in the comments, is there a way to find out if your jurisdiction has a 287G agreement? I've written on this and I've connected to the DOJ and DHS database that updates it. And you can find it in my Substack. And unfortunately, it's accelerating extraordinarily quickly. The good news, though, is that you can actually ban 287G agreements. And in the state of Illinois, they've been banned. Governor Pritzker has banned them, so we don't have them here at all. And then if your local municipality does have a 287G, it's often as simple as getting your city council to vote to revoke it and to defund it, and then it's over. And look, the data shows for those who are like, well, we need this to keep our community safe. The data shows the opposite. 287G agreements actually hurt your local community because of a couple of reasons. One, it takes law enforcement away from your actual local community needs and makes them federal employees and deputizes them for federal needs. And they don't give a damn what's happening locally. Two, women who are suffering domestic violence and sexual abuse now hesitate to go to authorities or to the hospital for fear of having their children stripped away or being thrown in prison. And as you mentioned, Oliver, you said 75%. Here in Illinois, 97.4% of the people that they scooped up and threw into these concentration camps had no criminal record whatsoever. And so by having these agreements, you are condemning women and children to perpetual harm and suffering. And then ultimately, there's no actual evidence that this results in better enforcement of immigration policy at all. And so this is really just modern day fascism. It's a modern day Nazi army being used to terrorize our community members. It has no place, no justification. We're down to our last couple of minutes. Oliver. What are the couple of things that folks should do now to get involved with the campaign? How can they get connected with you? How can they support you to help you get across the finish line? Like, when is the primary? All the stuff.
Yeah, our primary election is on August 18th this year. So the voter registration deadline, Florida is a closed primary state. So I'm encouraging everyone to register as a Democrat by July 20th of this year. Then there's going to be a vote by mail request ballot deadline by August 6th. Early voting is August 8th to August 15th. So we're one of the later primaries, but more proximate than that, we have our FEC deadline coming up on March 31st. This is going to be really one of the most important markers to show our campaign's viability and grassroots support. So we'll ask everyone to please go to www.oliverforcongress.com. Donate if you can. You can also find us on social media. We're on TikTok, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, so on and so forth. And really, we need the support, not only financially, but to spread the word and to have more conversations such as this. Following, liking, sharing our content, sharing it with a friend is a tremendous help. There's also, if you go on our website and our local, or if you're national but want to phone bank, there are mobilize events that are synced up right with our website. So you can find canvassing events, virtual phone banking. We have phone banking available for any time of day. So you can literally just jump on our Scale to Win dialer, make calls directly into the district. We've had thousands of these contacts already. These are friendly conversations. Like I said, we're running in a closed primaries. You don't have to worry about running into any MAGA voters if you're canvassing with us or phone banking, because right now, these are people who reliably vote in Democratic primaries. They're people who are younger, who are just looking for ways to get involved. And so that volunteer support, as well as the financial support, is really going to carry us over the top, and then spreading the word online. So that's where you can find us, and really, really appreciate, again, everyone's support in all the different ways that that's going to come through for us.
And actually, I will ask you one more question. We had talked offline. To the extent you can share about polling, it shows an encouraging path to victory, provided people hear your message. And that's why it's so important to have the donations to get the message out, but also to volunteer. Can you speak a little bit about that? Because folks are going to ask, is this even a viable race? And what data do you have? If you could share that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so we just ran our first poll this month, and the results, honestly, on one hand, astounded me. On the other hand, completely comported with the conversations we've been having, thousands of these conversations to this point. Jared Moskowitz starts out below 50%, which, as we know, for any Democratic incumbent, any incumbent in general, if you don't have 50% support in a primary, that means you're vulnerable. So we have a place to start. And when people hear about our campaign, when people hear positive biographies, before even any negative campaigning, just that I'm a former Bernie Sanders campaign staffer, union organizer, not taking any corporate PAC or AIPAC money, running for Medicare for all to abolish and prosecute ICE and pass a $25 minimum wage, our support jumps up 38%. We go from 11% to 49%. Moskowitz loses 20% of his support just on an initial round of positive head-to-head bios. He drops from 45 to 36. We take a clear, commanding 13-point lead, well outside the 4.4% margin of error. And then even after negative campaigning, I'm a proud member of the Democratic Socialists of America, and we know that he's going to attack me on being a socialist, on being a democratic socialist, and as well as on standing up against AIPAC and against genocide. But even after that negative campaigning, our support still increases because we also did some issue based polling in our race. And by a 2-to-1 margin in South Florida, people want to either condition, reduce, or eliminate entirely U.S. military aid to Israel. That might sound surprising for South Florida, but if you've been following the polls to any degree across the country over the past several years, we're not that different here than the rest of the country. We do not want to see our taxpayer dollars go to fund genocide, to fund more illegal wars like what Donald Trump is carrying out in Iran. And so we have a clear electoral majority in the Democratic primary that is ready to stand up against AIPAC, against Benjamin Netanyahu, and against the Israeli genocidal apartheid regime. And we're ready to invest in America. We want Medicare for all. We want public servants that are free of political corruption by overturning Citizens United. And we don't want this illegal war with Iran and what Jared Moskowitz is continuing to entertain with this funding package where he says, well, I don't want to defund the troops now. We already have $1 trillion defense budget, a record defense budget. The troops are already funded. If you're still willing to give discretionary funding, you're just giving Donald Trump the blank check that he needs to continue another catastrophic war. I was old enough to remember at the start of the Iraq War and the catastrophe that that led to. So people are just ready for a candidate that stands up for human rights. And what we found in our polling is there is a clear pathway to victory. And if we get our name out there and we show the contrast, it's not going to be particularly close because Jared Moskowitz has hummed so closely to the far right with Donald Trump and Elon Musk and Ron DeSantis that it is toxic in a Democratic primary.
Yeah.
We just need the resources to get the word out.
Love it. And I am a man of action. I just donated to your campaign right now. I encourage everyone on here to also join me in donating. You're welcome back anytime. Keep killing it. And let's go out and win this election.
Yeah. Looking forward to doing this again. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for tuning in to Let's Address This with Qasim Rashid. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so we can continue to protect your human rights and our democracy. And tune in next week for our next episode, which is coming right around the corner. Peace out. That was Oliver Larkin. I am deeply impressed with this guy. He's been doing the work for a long time. He's walked the walk. He's talking the talk. He's running the campaign the right way. Check him out. Support his campaign. Throw a few bucks at him. Volunteer if you can. But it comes down to not being hopeless. Like, don't despair, right? We're up against a lot of crap right now. We're up against insane billionaire money. The many beats the money. And we need to believe that, and we need to act upon that. Plugging Sway again, sway.co. It's also available on the Apple Store, the App Store for Apple, the Google Play Store for Android. Check this out. And like I said, it's a free app, and it helps you organize effectively in your local, state, and federal elections. A really important way for us to be able to leverage our voices. Keep emphasizing that it's a free app because there's no barrier to entry here. I know some apps are a couple of bucks a month, $5 a month, $10 a month. And they could be worth it. And many of them are when they're talking about this kind of stuff. But the beauty of this app is that it's free. There's literally no barrier to entry. I need you guys to get involved there. Search my name once you get on there on sway.co and join my voting group so we can build critical mass. Right now, only about 300 people have joined my voting group. I need to get that to like 300,000. We can get there. I know we can, but we got to be effective about it. As we wrap up, April 1st, the Supreme Court is hearing a case on birthright citizenship. The ACLU is arguing in defense of birthright citizenship. This is because Donald Trump passed or wrote an executive order, which he seems to think is the same as a constitutional amendment. It is not. That tries to abolish birthright citizenship. And let me be explicitly clear. If birthright citizenship falls, the American experiment fails. It's game over at that point. And so let me tell you a little story about why that's so important. I'm an immigrant. In 1977, sorry, sheesh, almost 50 years ago, 1977, my father arrived in the United States, 30 bucks in his pocket. And he tells me the story that the cabbie that picked him up was very thoughtful, very kind. And when he found out that my dad was a new immigrant and only had 30 bucks, he turned off the meter and gave him a tour of Washington, D.C. on the house, which I thought was extraordinarily kind. I don't know who that guy was. I will never know, but God bless him, because what a thoughtful thing to do to welcome someone to your country. But he came here 30 bucks in his pocket, no guarantees, no powerful name, just a couple of bucks and a belief that he's going to work his behind off and build a better life for his family. And that's what he did. He came here because this is a country that promised something extraordinary, right? And we talk about it in a cliche sense, but we talk about, we can acknowledge the fact that this country was founded on the genocide of one people and the enslavement and genocide of another, and acknowledge that it calls us to be a more perfect union. You guys have heard me call out and condemn these injustices, and I also recognize that our nation must do better. This is from James Baldwin himself. A decade later, my mother joined him, and the rest of his kids joined him, the four of us, and my parents built this life for us. My mother died in 2023. My dad died just a year ago, and I don't think they could have imagined half a century later the life that their children would be living because of the opportunities that this country provided. My wife and I now have three amazing kids, all born here, all born as American citizens. We became citizens through naturalization. They were born as U.S. citizens. Now, here's where birthright citizenship is so critical. Because if that citizenship of my kids, of myself, is questioned, it's not just about us. It's about the tens of millions of people that it impacts in a very direct way. And so here's what's happening. On April 1st, the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments from the case Trump versus Barbara. This is a case challenging Trump's attempt to end birthright citizenship by executive order. The ACLU and his partners brought the case as a nationwide class action to defend this constitutional right of babies who would otherwise be affected by this order. Several federal courts have already blocked the policy as unconstitutional, but the Supreme Court, for some stupid reason, decided that they're going to take it up. And that's what makes me nervous, because this is already settled law. Supreme Court, unfortunately, doesn't care about settled law, but it's already settled law. It's a constitutional amendment. It's in the Constitution. And so at stake is one of the clearest promises contained within the Constitution, the Citizenship Clause of the 14th Amendment. If you go back to prior to the 14th Amendment, 1857, the Dred Scott decision, which designated Black people as less than human and therefore not privy to the rights afforded by the constitutional process of equality, people view that case as what led to the Civil War. And just to kind of give you an understanding of what the Dred Scott case was, it's a very common sense argument that, hey, the Constitution says all people are created equal, Black people are people, therefore we cannot be enslaved. And the Supreme Court ruled under Justice Taney, who was a white supremacist Supreme Court justice. He said, yes, the Constitution does say that all people are created equal, but Black people are subhuman, and therefore you don't qualify for this constitutional protection. This is how they twisted the plain meaning. This was the genocidal, the word genocide didn't exist back then, but this was the genocidal rhetoric that they used, the dehumanization, the fascist rhetoric that they used. And scholars agree that this actually is what ultimately led to the Civil War, that every legal means had been exhausted, this white supremacist construct remained, and therefore the result was civil war. And this is why when people get upset at John Brown for resorting to violence, I always tell them that you're actually engaging in white supremacist rhetoric, because John Brown didn't engage in violence. He responded to violence with violence. And every person who has a problem with what John Brown did is telling you that if their family was being murdered and killed, they would just stand there and let them do it and not defend their family and not defend their community. So don't give me that trash argument. Now, after the Civil War, there was ratification of the Reconstruction Amendments, the 14th Amendment being among them. And it was written explicitly not just to overturn Dred Scott, but also to ensure that citizenship could never again be manipulated to exclude people based on their ancestry or their race or for some kind of political convenience. And the text is unambiguous. I mean, it could not be more clear. It says, in clear terms, quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. Simple. This is not accidental. It was a deliberate safeguard in the Constitution designed to prevent future political leaders from deciding arbitrarily or opportunistically who belongs in this country and who doesn't. And this was not just to ensure the horrific ruling of Dred Scott doesn't happen again. It wasn't just to ensure the dehumanization of people doesn't happen again, but also to ensure that this country would apply a broad rule of birthright citizenship that does not depend on what some future president might want. It now depends on the Constitution. It's protected by the Constitution. And so for more than a century, the Supreme Court has obviously affirmed this principle. There's a famous case, United States versus Wang Kim Ark. He was a Chinese American, and he, born to immigrant parents, left the United States to visit China, came back, and was denied entry, that you're not a citizen. And he sued, saying, no, actually, I am a citizen. I was born here. Went to the Supreme Court. Ruled, yep, he's a citizen. He was born here. That's what the 14th Amendment says. This has been well established. Trump's executive order attempts to override that very clear Supreme Court ruling and the very clear text of the 14th Amendment. It's indefensible. There is just no argument for this. And for the Supreme Court to take this up is just insane to me. My hope is that they rule 9-0 and say, hey, we're slapping you in the face. Don't do this again. You cannot overturn birthright citizenship with executive order. My fear is that that's not what's going to happen. And that's what is extremely troublesome to me right now. Because there's a broader sinister strategy here. This is not just about birthright citizenship. It's part of a broader attempt by the Trump regime to define who is and who is not an American. He has built concentration camps since returning to office. He has gutted asylum protections. He has deployed federal agents to target immigrants or anyone who seems like an immigrant, even if they have no criminal record. Like I said, here in Chicago, more than 97% of the people they've arrested have no criminal record whatsoever. They are deporting people to foreign gulags in El Salvador. They are trying to deport people to countries like third countries they've never been to before. Right now, they're trying to deport Mahmoud Khalil, an Egyptian, Algerian American, to like Sudan or something. And they've attempted to punish people and deny them the First Amendment rights simply for speaking up. And so this is not just about birthright citizenship. It's about our basic rights as Americans, as this basic ability to function and live in this society. The Constitution must matter. And the thing is that this is not theoretical language. This is the plain text of what the Constitution says, not just for families like mine, but for every American out there. Imagine your kid is born and they say, well, we can't guarantee any rights for your kid until you prove that you're a citizen. And if for some reason your status is under question or the government decides they don't want you to be a citizen anymore, now your kid is in jeopardy for the crime of being born. There is so much that will go wrong if this happens that it will absolutely be another Dred Scott moment, is what I fear. It will undermine the basic, I mean, we've already been down this road, right? When the dehumanization of people happens, it leads to violence because the dehumanization of people is violence. And I want to be clear about that. The response isn't violence. Dehumanization is violence. And if the Supreme Court rules in this barbaric way, they are ruling in a violent way to enable fascism to become even more violent. Because if the Supreme Court upholds Trump, he will unleash this Gestapo police on anyone perceived to not be an American, which is basically anyone who's not white, male, blonde hair, blue eyes. And so for me, this is not a left versus right issue, my friends. This is a humanitarian issue, and that's why I need you to pay attention and continue to put pressure. Check out my Substack where I write about this in more detail with all the receipts. That's the show we have for today. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so we can continue to protect your human rights and our democracy.